So the land we write theory from must be acknowledged, right? But besides recognizing its traditional owners, it is also engaging with the physical and non-physical forces that constitute these lands. These forces not only shape the content we write, but they shape the shape of how we write. And by shape, I mean a text's composition, its grammatical inflections, and so on. And these forces also shape the writer, shapes you, shapes me. The writer does not just survey and reflect on the land. The writer is produced by the land. This attention to how land and territory is produced is especially important for something like planning theory. Planning theory often functions to prescribe what a better future should be. It normalizes the future. But we ask, for whose future? Today's Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands is a key node in the Trans-Pacific network of economic, labor, and material flows, especially in the real estate sector. Hence, to write of Southeast Asian cities is already to write trans-Pacifically and vice versa. Writing about Southeast Asian cities while living in MST lands, I am writing from many places, and for and with many places and people yet to come. The Trans-Pacific has innumerable places and people that are yet to come. So how does theoretical writing approach this yet to come? For this talk, I hope to connect two ideas. First, writing from and with yet to come people. Second, developing a different relationship between theory and material design practice. But more precisely, I'm asking, how can the relationship between theory and practice be transformed to produce a space, or what we can say an event, can usher in feelings and emergences of places and people yet to come? The political intention here is, of course, to unsettle planning's dominant prescriptive function, hence to unsettle its role in an imperial geography, and lastly, to incite hope. I work locally in Vancouver as an urban designer using Vancouver-specific bylaws. Everything seems local, right? However, what is the local in the Trans-Pacific flows? Two projects I worked on complicates this idea of the local. The large projects financed by Southeast Asian companies with histories intertwined with palm oil. Malay rainforests are unsettled for palm oil, and that in turn unsettles Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh lands for real estate. The interesting thing here is that a sizable percentage of these projects are subsidized housing, but based on current economics, it takes roughly about 5 market units to pay for one subsidized unit. And the total market units to be built, and even the master plans design, are designed to sustain a feasible Trans-Pacific realty. Despite the Trans-Pacific network having no imperial metropole, and elusive colonialism still resettles indigenous land and lives to perpetuate centuries-old ethno-economic segregation. Protectionist laws are often passed to curb foreign speculations, but these laws often fail because they only concern who speculates, and not why the logic of property as surplus generator remains. Also, land reparations is not addressed. If land is given back, its worth is still subject to surplus-driven economics. And protectionism enables also nationalism and hate crime, right? Now, is the fault with all global flows or the type of flows? Trans-Pacific exchanges to subsidize housing on either side of the Pacific may not be a bad thing itself. Can flows that not result in surplus generation be encouraged? So rather than halt Trans-Pacific flows, augment them. How to imagine Trans-Pacific solidarities for indigenous housing, for example, outside the usual economic models. But Trans-Pacific solidarity does not imply only one way to augment. Each site has unique conditions and connections demanding unique modes of augmentation, and these are not generalizable into replicable procedures, policies, and implementations and outcomes. Hence, this is opposite to planning's expectation for generalization, standardization, and replication. Moreover, the Trans-Pacific is not static. Any plans or even theories to augment these flows can never catch up to prescribe an end state in advance. The Trans-Pacific, one may say, never ends. So immersed in this never-ending Trans-Pacific, planning theory should acknowledge the limits of its own prescriptive function. Nonetheless, writing and theorization should still continue, albeit within the many yet to come places and people arising from within the Trans-Pacific flows. Amidst these flows, theory's ethical response might be to incite change without prescribing what that change must be. Amidst these flows, theory connects with other texts, other spaces, people, rewriting again and again from and with people and places yet to come. Homi Bhabha notes, theory does not reveal undebatable truths about society, people, or history. It is an exercise of composing particular texts and concepts to gravitate a reader to its new political actions. For Bhabha, this does not, however, suggest they are only linguistic constructs. Theoretical writing is neither anterior nor an afterthought to history and political actions. Rather, it breaks the usual logic of causality and determinacy between theory and practice. It's untying theory from its old authoritarian voice. Theory is no longer conflated with rules for living. Now, to do so, theoretical writing may embrace a mode of composition that produces what we can say inklings, but no less inklings that can gravitate the body and mind to act otherwise, even at risk of an inability to prescribe the exact post-colonial state. Theory does not declare the future as history. It is a tool to cultivate potentials, hence a greater number of relations of care may emerge. So we have to ask, what is it to think, draw, and write, even if just inklings are formed? Now I'm thinking of this rather beautiful line about the relationship between thinking and feelings in this Jean-Luc Godard movie. One of the characters, Marianne, said, "There are ideas inside feelings." What I see from this is this. Ideas subsist within feelings, even if no clear concept of image is articulated. We shift words and images around each other as we theorize. And sometimes those feelings of something at the cusp of emerging take hold. Sometimes feelings solidify into places, people, identities, and communities. But often they also remain feelings of futures almost graspable. It is a feeling of many potential places condensed together. It is ideas inside feelings that perhaps connects theory, writing, and material design practices as a single event. Now, is the feeling of indeterminate people and places edging between text and images useful or useless? Most people would say it is useless because of its inability to produce concrete deliverables. But however, we can ask the question differently. Is the useless useful? In doing so, the uselessness of theoretical writing and material design practices that actually refuses to produce a concrete deliverable is also its usefulness. A refusal of end states can be a refusal to stop thinking, a refusal to terminate thinking. Refusing to subjugate thinking as a means to an end can also be a political move. It is to liberate thinking from planning's desire to efface differences in favor of determined futures. It is to unsettle things like the 5-minute city, the smart city, or the Asian urbanism that often disregard history's messiness. The yet-to-come people is a palpable sign of hope. It energizes us to continually write and draw against representations of a model morality. Eluding representation can be a philosophical political move as well as a materially based one. It concerns the creative misuse of language, spatial relations between words, images, and objects, creative relations between the document and the city, critical illusions and necessary illusions. Design theorist Alan Lupton and Abbott Midler once noted, it is really to challenge representation. So following Lupton and Miller, one might ask, what kind of composition can a planning theory text or even a plan develop to push the mechanics of representation? Can there be more than what is seemingly communicated? Montages and palimpsests may provide some material and philosophical forces to challenge planning's story of linear progress. They do not have standard construction procedures nor shape, but this is not to say anything goes, right? Political relevance is still expressed through a careful layering and stitching together of visual, legal, historical, social, cultural, economic, and spatial forces. Political relevance is, however, not the same as political end states. A politically relevant and even defined geography can still have innumerable potentials. Thus, while the flows between the Malay and MST lands may indeed map the East India and Hudson Bay Company's trade routes, an infinitesimal number of yet named places and people lie in between. It is really about a topological geography instead of a topographic one. In this space, any point can connect with each other without immediate topographic adjacency, yet nothing connects into a perfect whole. Tensions are preserved as a creative force for thinking, for the yet to come to stay multiplicitous. So this project explores how tensions between competing histories can be sustained. And to do that, we insert hidden rollovers into a standard planning document such as this you see on the screen. The rollovers shows passages questioning the state of real estate and queries who are the communities imagined in the plan and who's not imagined. Amidst tensions, the question of for who else hopefully emerges. For who else is a question that also is a kind of hope, a feeling of yet named places and people. For who else is something that also can trigger a sense that there are yet written planning documents. Palimpsests appear from both the past and the future. Undoubtedly, representing oppressed peoples on all levels of politics, economics, and writings, it's key to countering imperial narratives. So why do we want to resist representation? First, how is representation being used in the context of this talk? Resisting representation, I want to suggest here, it's being attentive to how oppressed people's futures are irreducible by plans, by planners. Similarly, it's being attentive to how theoretical writing itself cannot capture anyone's future. So here, resisting representation is not about denying a future, but a political move to preserve the future as many potentials. Besides, a future cannot be prescribed until it arrives. And at the time of its arrival, it is always something else. A future arrives with other yet named futures. And so insofar as planners and theorists are always part of this continual arrival of many futures, the predilection to prescribe futures also dissolves and reforms as its own arrival. A theorist writes to halt static representations of the future. But what happens to the theorist? What happens to the theorist's eye? What happens when they write from within the field of study? Dwelling amidst the flows between the Malay and MST lands, where or what is the I? From where is this question being asked? Who is asking? Insofar as the I is changing amidst the changing trans-Pacific flows, the I is not standing from above to prescribe a final trans-Pacific future for the Malay and MST lands. Of each sentence the I types, the flows rewrite what the I is thinking, Baba notes. Theories are always in media res, or in the middle of things, emerging and changing in the middle of things. A theorist's I never begins nor ends, but is in a perpetual middle. Being unable to map the I, however, differs from switching opinions. It is a new model of thinking where the I thinks in its field of inquiry. Here, the I no longer encounters the people and places yet to come as others. This is because the I cannot actually describe itself as unchanged from the encounter. The I becomes its own other. The I's eyes look from the perspective of the people yet to come, in the middle of places yet to come. While the I is trying to make sense of the non-recognizable people and places yet to come, it is trying to make sense of itself. And so, without the surveyor's gaze from 1,000 feet above, the theorist I is liberated from being the master planner of an imperial geography. A good thinker is often equated with someone who can easily recognize given concepts to explain a situation's cause and effect, then provide solutions. The planning canon is certainly not short of these pre-established explanations and solutions. For example, the supply-demand concept, housing surplus will solve unaffordability. It's still being applied to justify identification very often. It is comfortable, of course, to rely on established reasoning and solutions. We're socialized to do so. But as Joe Deleuze notes, in this kind of approach, difference itself is crucified. Approaching that which is different through familiar analogies, familiar binaries, familiar ethnicities and habitats actually limits the encounter itself, because that which is different is now being reduced to being like A or being not like A, or B is equal as a result of A. It is as if that which is different is known in advance, ceding little appreciation for other ways of knowing, other ways of interaction. Additionally, this kind of encounter circumscribes experimentations in both thinking and action. So Deleuze proposes that to embody difference itself is in fact to cultivate a mode of encounter that embraces non-representational things or non-recognition outside of the familiar. It is embracing that which is differing from itself. The question becomes, what can bodies do together to produce new potentials and less to prejudge what identities these bodies belong to? In encountering that which is differing from itself, differentiating from itself, even the body of the Cartesian eye differentiates from itself. Insofar as thinking occurs through all the faculties, it is materially and corporeally reform and reform. Designers think through their hands interacting with pen and with paper. Think of that connecting point of the paper, the pen, the fingertips, eyes, and the brain synapses. There lies the feeling and hope of unannounced cities. Thinking is that space between what is already drawn and what is yet drawn. More importantly, the varying forces that exerted by the pen's sharpness or bluntness or the mouse's tactility inflects thinking's vectors and the spaces felt. Objects do not passively wait to be imbued with meanings. Instead, as Nigel Thrift suggests, object makes thought doable. For Thrift, thinking is produced in a shifting ecology of animate and inanimate things, what he calls the malleable media. The design studio, for example, is one of these ecologies. Drawings can intersect with the text we read, but often in ways not immediately recognizable, not judgeable by pre-established concepts. The thought of concepts and visions of future cities shift along with this ecology. In fact, thinking proper to the problem at hand does not precede this ecology. This ecology we call the studio. Thinking is practiced in the space between the words typed, the fingers typing, the mouse clicks, and the objects and images. It is not my studio per se, but more the studio that produces the I, the me. And in many cases, the studio is also the broader city, even a transoceanic, transpacific place. Thinking amidst objects may be involuntary. The conflicts of forces that may give rise to feelings of that yet-to-come people or those yet-to-come places may not be owed to a Cartesian eye. The body, the mind aroused into thinking rather than the thinking being willed by an existing eye. For Deleuze, it is not just thinking's genesis that may lie outside the eye, but thinking itself may be an event that only can be sensed. It's something that occurs in and also perplexes the conjoined faculties, forcing the faculties to build new problems together, conjointly. But often these are unanswerable problems. For example, think of this question. What can housing do to resist trans-Pacific land exploitation? This question cannot be answered with familiar housing and socioeconomic solutions if these solutions simply treat land as a passive object. Such questions problematize as assumptions. But encountering unanswerable questions, may indeed produce anxieties, but anxiety is not a mark of futility. Instead, the unanswerable capacitates a continual act of making sense through continual drawing, continual writing, in hopes of broadening connections and thus build friendships yet to come. What is cultivating hope? Maybe cultivating a feeling that the possibilities for moving to its liberation from intersected oppressions can multiply again and again. Hope is always being cultivated. Of course, hoping may entail prioritization and selections, even form of privileging for special or specific political actions. But to hope is to build in the power to also unsettle what was prioritized, what was privileged. This is hope's power to politicize. The question is, how can text and images be composed to express a power to unsettle even its own assumptions, to thus experiment, hence renew hoping? For planning, this is a plan that eschews its own ground. Now, being experimental is not a series of tests to prove a hypothesis. Rather, it is a continual ungrounding. Ground overflows to form access, which can become the genetic material for places and people yet to come. Access and overflows are not just a mosaic of discrete parts or units, but the manying of the many. They are meanings, utterances, and inklings that are constantly differentiating from themselves. Deleuze and Guattari suggest a life that is prescribed in advance actually exhibits an indifference to life. It is a still life portrait. One might suggest a refusal to say what life must be, but let it overflow actually preserves lives. So for Deleuze and Guattari, theories are not guide for what life must be, but theories are tools to sustain life and thinking. albeit what they say is a dangerous exercise, a groping experimentation involving measures that are not very respectable, nor rational, nor reasonable. And here, we come back to the act of renewing hope at every turn, to be making sense continually of how text and images connect with each other and with wider global forces. Experimenting is a mode of life. Contending with the intensities and multiplicities that make the trans-Pacific flows between Malay and MST lands, that be considered a kind of continual ethics making, a continual striving for yet imageable hopes, even at risk of muddying the dominant post-colonial dream. But what is the post-colonial unless the strangeness of involuntary dreams appears? The trans-Pacific future expresses a non-recognizable newness, something likened to what Deleuze calls terra incognita. In the space and time of writing this talk, the research questions and the problematic has multiplied. Perhaps this is the necessary ungrounding of theoretical text that engages with the changing trans-Pacific. Who am I in this writing, and where? How many eyes are yet to come? Lastly, how can the act of hoping be shaped to avoid capture by the danger of our own trans-Pacific master plan?